He was the kid nobody believed in, until one test turned him into the school's biggest legend. Ethan Parker had a reputation nobody wanted. In every classroom, every hallway, every school record, his name carried the same label. The boy who always failed. Didn't matter what the subject was. Math, F. Science, F. History, F. English, somehow an even lower F. Teachers whispered about him in the staff room, not because they were mean, but because they pitied him. Poor kid, they'd say. He just doesn't have the ability. He's not like the other students. But the students, they weren't gentle at all. They laughed when he froze during questions, rolled their eyes when he joined group work. Some avoided sitting near him, like his bad luck might rub off. And the worst part, Ethan never defended himself, never argued, never explained. He just kept his head down and stayed quiet. To everyone around him, he was simply the kid who struggled to keep up. A kid everyone expected to fade into the background. A kid students mocked to feel smarter. But far away from the noise, from the fingers pointing at him, from the voices judging him, something else was happening. Something no one ever imagined. Every morning, Ethan walked into school with the same exhausted eyes. Not the kind of tired that comes from playing games all night, but the kind that comes from carrying a weight far heavier than any textbook. Teachers assumed he slept late. Classmates assumed he didn't care. But the truth? They couldn't have been more wrong. Because the real reason Ethan struggled had nothing to do with laziness and everything to do with what happened the moment he walked out of school every day. While his classmates went home to snacks, video games, and sports practice, Ethan's real day didn't end when the bell rang. It began. His mother was sick. Not a little cold sick. The kind of sick that fills a house with silence, medical bills, and worry you can feel in walls. His father worked double shifts just to keep them afloat. So Ethan became everything else the house needed. He cooked. He cleaned. He bought groceries. He helped his mother walk from room to room. He monitored her medications. Some nights, he didn't sleep at all, staying awake to make sure she was still breathing. At home, he wasn't a kid. He wasn't a student. He was a caregiver, a nurse, a one-man support system. So when he sat in class the next morning staring at a quiz he never had time to study for, it wasn't because he didn't want to learn. It was because he'd spent all night taking care of the person he loved most. But nobody knew. He never told his teachers. He had no friends to confide in. Even the counselor who tried talking to him once only heard 2 words. "I'm fine." And that ended the conversation. Over time, failure became normal. Not because he believed he wasn't smart, but because he didn't have the strength left to prove otherwise. Homework, undone. Tests, blank. Projects, rushed. Hope, fading. He stopped raising his hand. Stopped making eye contact. Stopped believing he could ever catch up. Every F wasn't a measure of intelligence. It was a silent cry for help no one saw. The world doesn't notice the battles people hide. It only notices the results. To his classmates, he was slow. To teachers, he was the kid who needs extra help. To himself, he was someone trying desperately not to fall apart. Then one day, in science class, the teacher handed back a test. Another big red F. The girl sitting beside him leaned in and whispered, "Why do you even bother coming to school? You fail everything." A few students around her laughed. Ethan didn't react, didn't argue, didn't flinch. He just folded the test quietly and slid it into his notebook. But inside, something cracked. Not anger, not embarrassment, just exhaustion. A deep, heavy exhaustion that made his chest feel tight. He wanted to tell them, wanted to scream, "You don't know what I deal with. You don't understand my life." But he didn't. He just took a slow breath, blinked away the tiredness burning behind his eyes, and stayed silent. Because what could he say? Who would believe him? Who would care? And yet, even after everything, Ethan never gave up. Every morning, he still woke before sunrise, helped his mother, cleaned the house, made breakfast, got ready for school, walked there with heavy steps and heavier thoughts. And even though the world called him a failure, he kept showing up, not because school mattered, but because a tiny part of him still hoped that one day someone would finally see him. See past the grades, past the silence, past the rumors. Someone who would understand that Ethan wasn't weak. He wasn't dumb. He wasn't useless. He was a kid carrying more responsibility than most adults ever do. He was fighting a battle every single day, completely alone. And while everyone else saw an F student who couldn't pass a test, they never realized they were looking at the strongest person in the room. Ethan wasn't expecting anything unusual that morning. He walked into school with the same tired eyes, the same heavy backpack, and the same quiet steps that people barely noticed. But the moment he reached the hallway, the speakers crackled, and the principal's voice boomed across every classroom, every corridor, every locker. Attention students. Today, the entire school will participate in an academic challenge. One test. 1 hour. No exceptions. A ripple of excitement and anxiety shot through the building. Students looked at each other with raised eyebrows. A surprise test. Are they serious? Bro, I didn't even eat breakfast. Within minutes, talk spread like wildfire. People were guessing which subjects would be included. Math. Science. A mix? Something impossible. But one thing almost everyone agreed on. Ethan Parker didn't stand a chance. As he entered his homeroom, faces turned toward him with predictable smirks. Yo, Ethan's gonna hit a new record today, someone whispered loudly. Another student snickered. Bro's gonna get a negative score. A third added, he'll finish last like always. They weren't even trying to hide the insults anymore. Ethan heard every word, every laugh, every sigh of pity. But as usual, he didn't react. He simply walked to his desk in the last row, placed his bag down carefully, and waited quietly. Inside, though, he felt something strange. A small flicker. Not anger. Not sadness. Something else. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was pressure building up over months and months of being dismissed and underestimated. Maybe it was the fact that he had survived another sleepless night taking care of his mother. But when the test papers were finally handed out, something in Ethan's mind clicked. Something silently switched on. A focus he had never shown before. A level of calm he didn't even know he possessed. The transformation nobody expected. The classroom rustled with the sound of turning papers. Pens tapped nervously. Chairs shifted. Students groaned quietly at the complex problems printed across the page. But Ethan, he didn't flinch. He didn't sigh. He didn't stare blankly. He didn't freeze. He simply picked up his pencil and took one long, slow breath. The kind of breath someone takes right before diving into deep water. Then he began. His pencil moved differently today. Not shaky, not hesitant, not confused, but precise, steady, almost sharp. For the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't thinking about everything waiting for him at home. Not the medication schedule, not the bills piling up, not the weight of responsibilities sitting on his shoulders. It was just him and the test. Nothing else. Across the room, a few students glanced backward, expecting to see him struggling. Instead, they saw something that made them pause. Ethan, the boy they always called slow, the boy they teased for failing everything, was filling in answers rapidly, confidently, like he knew exactly what he was doing. One girl blinked. Is he actually answering these? A boy frowned. No way. He's probably just guessing. But he wasn't guessing. For months, even in the chaos of his life, Ethan had been absorbing things without realizing it. Teachers' explanations, board notes, examples from old homework he never got to finish, bits and pieces of concepts from overhearing others study, like puzzle pieces floating around his mind. And today, for the first time, all the pieces fell into place. Minutes passed, then 30, then 45. Students groaned as they erased mistakes, skipped questions, whispered to themselves, and tapped their feet. But Ethan? He didn't erase a single answer, didn't skip a single problem, didn't stop once. It was as if all the noise, all the chaos, all the judgment had slipped away, and he could finally hear his own thoughts clearly. The teacher at the front of the room noticed him too. She watched him carefully, not with suspicion but surprise. His posture, usually tired and slumped, was straight. His eyes, usually dull, were sharp and focused. His hands, usually shaking, were steady. It was like watching a completely different student. The final minutes. With 5 minutes left, the room filled with panic. Bro, I still have 3 pages left. These questions are impossible. Why would they give us this? But Ethan sat quietly, scanning his paper one last time, checking each answer with a calm confidence nobody had ever seen from him. He wasn't rushing, wasn't panicking, wasn't stressed. He just knew. When the teacher finally called, "Time's up," students dropped their pencils with relief or frustration. Ethan didn't. He placed his pencil down neatly, folded his hands, and exhaled slowly. The kind of exhale a person gives after finishing something that mattered deeply to them. As the papers were collected, whispers spread again. Did he finish the whole thing? No way. Ethan? Nah, he must have copied. But from who? No one sits near him. They couldn't understand it, because for the first time ever, Ethan wasn't the last to finish. He wasn't struggling. He wasn't confused. He wasn't lost. He was ready. But nobody, not the students, not the teacher, not even Ethan himself, was prepared for what would happen when the results came back. Because this test, this single, unexpected challenge, was about to change everything. Everything. From the moment the clock started ticking, something extraordinary happened, something no teacher, no student, and not even Ethan himself had seen before. Ethan didn't hesitate. Not for a second. While the rest of the class flipped their papers nervously, glancing around to see who looked confident and who looked terrified, Ethan's pencil was already moving. Not shaky, not slow, not uncertain, but fast, controlled, sharp. The kind of movement that comes from someone who finally has room to breathe and focus. The sound of his pencil scratching across the paper was so constant, so steady, that the teacher at the front of the room actually looked up, surprised. She expected Ethan to be frozen, staring at the first question, confused and overwhelmed like he always seemed during exams. But instead, his eyes were locked onto the paper, scanning each question with a seriousness she had never seen in him. His posture wasn't the usual slouch of exhaustion. It was upright, determined, almost laser-focused. One of the teachers walking past the classroom stopped at the door and leaned in, curious. He whispered to the main teacher, "Is that Ethan?" She nodded slowly, still watching him. The teacher squinted, disbelief widening his eyes. "He's actually working? Like, properly working?" The main teacher didn't answer. She couldn't, because she didn't understand it either. This wasn't the Ethan they knew. This wasn't the kid who left half his tests blank. This wasn't the kid who avoided eye contact when asked a question. This wasn't the student who sat in class looking like his mind was 1,000 miles away. This Ethan was different. Pages were turning rapidly in front of him. Every few seconds, he'd move on to the next question without hesitation. He wasn't skipping anything, wasn't pausing, wasn't second-guessing. He was solving, accurately, confidently, like he'd been waiting years for this one moment where everything in his head made perfect sense. The girl sitting next to him kept darting glances sideways. She had never seen something like this. At one point, she mouthed silently to her friend across the aisle, "Is he possessed?" Her friend shrugged, staring at Ethan like they were watching a horror movie. Across the room, small pockets of whispers began. "Why is he so focused? Is he actually getting it right? No way, bro, Ethan. He never works like this." Even the kids who used to joke about him being slow were sitting up straighter now, watching him with something closer to confusion than mockery. The teacher stepped closer, pretending to check on other students, but really wanting to see Ethan's paper. She glanced down, and her breath caught. He wasn't just filling in answers randomly. He was showing full steps, neat handwriting, clear reasoning, correct formulas. He was solving problems most students in the class hadn't even attempted yet. She blinked, almost in disbelief. "This can't be real," she muttered under her breath. The teacher at the door leaned in again. "How's he doing?" She whispered back, "He's ahead. He's actually ahead of everyone." The other teacher stared into the classroom, eyebrows raised. "How? He's never." "I know," she said quietly, "but look at him." The teachers exchanged a look that held equal parts confusion, shock, and a growing realization. Maybe all this time, they had been completely wrong about Ethan. He wasn't slow. He wasn't incapable. He wasn't hopeless. He was distracted, overwhelmed, carrying more than any child should ever have to carry. But on this day, for this 1 hour, the weight on his shoulders didn't crush him. It sharpened him. It made him unstoppable. By the 30-minute mark, most students were sweating, sighing, flipping back and forth through the test, trying to guess the answers or skipping questions entirely. But Ethan? He turned the final page, wrote down the last solution, put his pencil aside. Then he sat back, calm, still, almost peaceful. The teacher checked the time. There were 30 full minutes left. Ethan had finished the entire test. First. Not only first, but finished in half the time. She watched him with disbelief as he gently placed his pencil on the table, folded his hands, and stared forward, not with fear or embarrassment, but with a quiet confidence she had never seen in him. Students around him started noticing too. Bro, he's done. He can't be done. What did he do? Skip it? No, I watched him. He literally answered everything. And then it happened. Ethan stood up, slowly, quietly, softly. He picked up his test paper and walked toward the front of the room. Every eye followed him. Students paused mid-sentence, mid-problem, mid-breath. Even the teacher's eyes widened as he approached her desk. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look scared. He didn't look ashamed. He looked certain. He placed the test on her desk, nodded politely, and walked toward the door. No rushing, no trembling, no anxiety. Just calm steps echoing in a room full of stunned silence. The teacher stared after him, still holding his test in her hand, her heart pounding with questions she didn't know how to answer. One thought echoed through her mind. Is this the same kid? Because the boy who walked out that door was not the boy who walked in. And nobody, not the teachers, not the students, not even Ethan, knew that what had just happened was the beginning of a transformation that would shake the entire school. This wasn't just a test. This was the moment that revealed the truth they had all missed. The next morning, the entire school buzzed with a strange energy. Something felt different. Students whispered in the hallways. Teachers walked faster than usual, and even the seniors, who usually didn't care about anything, kept glancing at the office door like they were expecting something huge. Rumors spread like wildfire. Bro, I heard the test results were crazy. Nah, I heard nobody passed. Maybe they're canceling classes. But by 11 a.m., everything became clear. The principal's voice echoed through the speakers. All students and staff, please report to the auditorium. Immediately, every hallway went silent. No one knew what was coming. Students entered the huge auditorium, and the atmosphere was heavy, almost too quiet. No music, no chatter, no jokes, just uneasy silence. Even teachers stood stiffly, their faces serious. Ethan walked in alone, taking a seat at the very back as he always did. Nobody noticed him. Nobody ever did. But today, the universe was watching him. The principal stepped up to the microphone, holding a single sheet of paper. Her expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't relaxed either. It was something else, something none of them had seen before. She tapped the mic. Students, everyone leaned forward. We received the results from yesterday's academic challenge. A wave of tension washed over the room. Someone whispered, "Watch, Ethan probably broke another record for lowest score." A few students laughed. Ethan kept his head down, but the principal wasn't smiling. She continued, "Not only did we receive the results, but what happened has never happened in this school's history." Everyone looked around. Never? What could be that big? She took a deep breath. A new school record has been set. Instantly the room lit up with energy. Bet it's Jackson. Or maybe Maya, they study all night. No way, it's Olivia. She always gets 99s. The principal raised a hand. This student didn't just break the record, the auditorium froze. They achieved a perfect score. Gasps. Real gasps. Not the fake dramatic ones, real shock. A perfect score in the hardest test the school had ever given? Impossible. Students stared at each other. Teachers exchanged looks of disbelief. Someone muttered, "Wait, no one gets perfect. Not even top kids." But the principal wasn't done. She held up the paper like it was a piece of history. And the student who achieved the perfect score, silence thicker than ever, was someone none of you expected. Murmurs spread like a ripple through water. Who? 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 Eyes darted toward the smartest students in the front rows, the class toppers, the overachievers, but none of them looked confident. In fact, they looked nervous. The principal looked over the crowd slowly, paused, and said a name that hit the auditorium like a thunderbolt. Ethan. Not Jackson. Not Maya. Not Olivia. Ethan. The boy everyone saw as a failure. The kid nobody paid attention to. The F student. The joke. The background character. The kid who sat in the back with his head low. That Ethan. For a moment no one reacted. Not because they didn't hear it, but because their brains refused to believe it. Then voices erupted. What? No way. This has to be a mistake. Slowly, one by one, hundreds of heads turned toward the back row, toward the kid they ignored, bullied, laughed at, underestimated. Ethan sat there frozen, not smiling, not proud, not smug, just silent, as always. But everything around him had changed. The entire school was staring at him like they were seeing him for the first time. Some with confusion, some with disbelief, some with embarrassment, and some with guilt. Especially the ones who used to whisper behind his back. Especially the ones who pushed him in hallways. Especially the ones who said he would never amount to anything. Now the spotlight was on the boy they tried to erase. The principal continued, her voice filled with meaning. Ethan earned the highest score ever recorded in this school's history. A perfect score. A score even our top students have never achieved. You could hear a pin drop. She added, "Let today be a reminder. Intelligence isn't always visible, and a quiet student is never a weak student." That line hit everyone. Hard. The auditorium fell into the deepest silence it had ever felt. A silence not of shock anymore, but of respect. Ethan slowly rose from his seat. For the first time in years, people moved aside for him. Students actually looked at him, not through him. Some were amazed. Some ashamed. Some inspired. Ethan didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He didn't say a word. He just took a quiet breath and walked out of the auditorium with the calm confidence of someone who had finally been seen, not as a failure, but as a legend. The auditorium was still. The kind of silence that makes your chest feel heavy and every heartbeat echo in your ears. Students, teachers, even the principal, all of them, were staring at Ethan as he walked to the stage. He moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured, as if he had finally accepted that all eyes were on him. The same boy who had always sat in the back, ignored, laughed at, underestimated, was now standing in front of the entire school. The air felt electric. You could almost hear the collective gasps of disbelief and curiosity swirling in the room. This wasn't just another test result being announced. This was a moment of reckoning, a truth waiting to be spoken aloud for the first time. Ethan stopped at the center of the stage. He looked out at the crowd, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with a quiet, calm strength that seemed impossible for someone his age. His eyes swept across every face, the students who had teased him, the ones who never noticed him, the teachers who had written him off, and even those who had thought he was destined to fail. And for the first time he spoke. His voice was soft at first, almost shaking with the weight of years of unseen struggle, but grew steadier with every word, carrying across the auditorium like a whisper that demanded to be heard. "I wasn't failing because I was stupid," he said. The words were simple, but they landed like a bomb. The room shifted. Murmurs tried to start, but the weight behind his voice silenced them. "I was failing because I was taking care of my sick mom every night. Every single night." He paused, letting it sink in. A few students exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had never stopped to think about what someone else might be going through outside the classroom. Teachers shifted in their seats, remembering how they had written him off as lazy, unmotivated, or incapable. And now, for the first time, they saw him, not as the F student, not as a background character, but as a person with a story nobody had ever taken the time to understand. "And because of that," Ethan continued, his voice gaining strength, "I didn't have time to study. I didn't have time to prepare. I didn't have a single moment to focus on myself or my grades. Every hour, every night, every responsibility belonged to her. And I accepted that because she needed me more than anyone else." His hands were trembling slightly now, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. This was the moment he had been waiting for, not to boast, not to seek sympathy, but to finally show the truth, to finally show who he really was. "But yesterday, I finally got 1 hour. Just 1 hour. 1 hour where I could sit, focus, and show who I really am." The entire school went silent. Not just quiet, but completely still. No phones buzzing. No whispers. No rustling papers. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Students who had once mocked him felt a sudden heaviness, a weight of guilt and awe mixed together. They realized that all their assumptions, all their teasing, all their laughter had been built on ignorance. This quiet boy, the one they had ignored, had a life they couldn't even imagine. He had carried burdens heavier than most adults could bear. And yet, he had shown up to school day after day, continuing to persevere while no one noticed. Teachers stared at him, their expressions changing from confusion to shock to admiration. They had judged him by what they could see, the failing grades, the quiet demeanor, the empty notebooks, but now they realized the truth. Ethan had been hiding brilliance not because he lacked it, but because life had demanded so much from him outside the classroom. Every F he received was not a measure of his intelligence, but a reflection of the unseen battle he fought every single day. Ethan's voice carried across the auditorium with newfound confidence now. I know I've struggled in your eyes. I know my grades looked bad. I know I didn't always participate or speak up. But that was never the real story. The real story is what happens behind closed doors, the sacrifices that nobody sees, and strength it takes to keep going when no one is watching. And yesterday, I got a moment to show just a piece of that strength. A few students' eyes glistened with the first hint of tears. Some teachers had to wipe their own eyes discreetly. Parents in the audience who had come to pick up their kids were shaking their heads in quiet disbelief. They realized that what they were witnessing wasn't just an academic achievement, it was a human triumph. A story of courage, resilience, and perseverance that went far beyond grades and tests. Ethan paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words settle into the hearts of everyone listening. He looked at the faces around him, the ones that had ignored him, laughed at him, doubted him, and he said softly, yet with undeniable power, sometimes the kid who struggles the most is the one fighting a battle no one sees. And sometimes the quietest person in the room is the strongest one of all. A wave of respect washed through the auditorium. Phones stayed in pockets. Whispers died completely. The room wasn't filled with the usual chaos of a high school assembly. It was filled with something rare, something profound, reverence. Students who had once whispered invisible under their breaths now sat straighter. Teachers who had judged him quietly nodded, understanding that they had been completely wrong. And Ethan, he didn't need applause. He didn't need validation. He had finally told the truth, and that was enough. He stepped back from the microphone, head held high, but shoulders relaxed. His voice had left an imprint, a lesson no one would forget. In that moment, he wasn't the F student anymore. He wasn't invisible. He wasn't a background character in the story of the school. He was the hero of his own story. He was the example of resilience, the proof that strength often comes in silence, and the reminder that everyone has battles they don't show. As he walked off the stage, the auditorium erupted, not in loud cheers, but in quiet, profound respect. Students turned to each other, realizing they had underestimated him. Teachers exchanged nods, understanding that sometimes the brightest minds and the strongest hearts are hidden beneath quiet, unassuming appearances. Ethan returned to his seat, calm, humble, and unchanged on the outside, yet everything about him had shifted in the eyes of those around him. And from that day on, no one ever called him invisible again. The quietest student had become the bravest, strongest, most remarkable presence in the school. The boy who everyone assumed was failing had shown them all what true strength looked like, and nobody in that auditorium would ever forget the lesson he taught them that day. If you were inspired by Ethan's story, don't forget to smash that like button to show some love. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a story that will shock, inspire, and leave you speechless. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that even the quietest person can change everything. Comment below, what would you do if you had just 1 hour to show who you really are?